As it turns out, there can be too many engines in this shop. I wish I could get through to the guy who's in charge of buying engines to tear down here and maybe explain to him what it takes to tear these things down, and perhaps we wouldn't be in the situation we're in. If only. Today we're going to chisel away at that list, and we're going to tear down this engine that's been on the shelf for a long time. This is a 1.7 liter D17A1 out of a 2003 Honda Civic. This came in the 2001 to 2005 Honda Civic Non-Vtec. It is essentially my least favorite Honda Civic engine ever. Now, I'm not saying that they're bad, that they won't make the distance. In fact, I believe this engine has a lot of miles on it. I ran the VIN on this engine, and it's from a car that was totaled in 2019 with 230,000 miles on it. And I got this thing about 5 months ago, and it was a core return for somebody that replaced an engine, bought an engine from a yard. So this engine could have 250, 300,000 miles on it. That was 5 years ago that the car was totaled that this engine came out of, and it came out of another Honda Civic, which I don't know how long they drove. So regardless, we're going to see what's wrong with this engine. We're going to tear it all down. There's a few good parts to sell. Most of it will end up in the scrap bin because there's not a lot of demand for these things. They're pretty prevalent in the self-service yards. And we're going to have some fun in the process, at least I hope. The D17 is my least favorite Honda Civic engine ever. And I know that's a rather harsh statement, but let's call this a comparison. So the non-Vtec version, this engine, the A1, produces 115 horsepower, which that's not a low or high power level. That's just about average for a 20-something-year-old Honda Civic. It's on par with all other economy cars from that era. But that's not why I don't like these engines. I don't like these engines because their predecessors were so much better in almost every way. The 88 to 91 OBD0 D series were super reliable. 92 to 95, incredibly reliable. In 96, they changed the size of the rod journals. They have a propensity of chewing up rod bearings. They also overheat more frequently and blow head gaskets more frequently, but they're still really easy to service, and I still like D16 Y5s, Y7s, and Y8s. And then 2001 came along, and they have all of the same problems as their predecessor, except now they're hard to work on, at least comparatively. Again, I don't think these are bad engines by any stretch. I just don't think they're as good as what they replaced. They did, however, upgrade the ignition system, and that is the only somewhat trade-off with getting an engine that's harder to work on. So normally, the next step would be to turn this thing over to see if it turns over, but as you can see, there's no crank bolt, and that's how I got it. So we're not going to be able to turn this thing over, so we're going to move right to the plugs. Now, I know I don't prefer Autolites, and I've voiced my opinion several times on this channel, and I don't think they make a bad plug, but this is a Honda, not a Ford. So these are not the plugs I would put in this engine, but regardless, nothing's bent or broken. But that one's a little suspiciously white. They also don't look very old. Something else worth mentioning, this engine is, she's a leaker. It's really dirty. And I know I get a lot of questions. Why don't you power wash these engines before you tear them down? And I have done that before. But as a rule, it's a whole bunch of time for stuff that ends up in the scrap bin. Most of the time, if the blocks are bad, there's no sense in cleaning them. And it also gives us clues as to what could have potentially happened. The next step is to unbolt the intake manifold. Okay. Okay, my ratchet wrench does not fit down here to get to the hard to get to bolts. This one will, though. This is way easier in the car. And by that I mean it's not easier in the car. What, you didn't think that the piston testing hammer could do more than just one task? It's a multi-purpose tool. This one's fun. And now there's just one. There is one in the dead center, so I have to remove some brackets. Actually, I think there's two more. we're gonna do this the safe way. And there's one down here. As long as I can do this without hitting the throttle body. Always want to save the hardest one for last. Before I get that one all the way out, there's a couple support brackets. There's no way in there. I'm sure getting this bolt started is really easy. Okay, now we just have a few hoses. Let's get some of these coolant hose out of the way. And crankcase ventilation. This one's pesky. Who installed this? Well, now that the intake's loose, we are leaking oil. That's not where oil goes. Now, let's see, did I miss any hose? Yeah, there's one over here. There's always more hose than you think there are. I'll get this one out of the way. Now we should be able to slide this off. Oh boy, this thing leaked a bunch of junk out. This whole area is coated in oil. We'll get this intake flange off. Let's take a look down the gullet. That looks good. That looks okay. I don't see anything jumping out at me yet. Everything looks good so far. The next first step we're going to take is to remove the valve cover. We have to pull the dipstick out first. And this could still have oil in it. Doesn't appear to have oil in it. Nope. Okay. Just give it a little tap. You know what? Why am I using a mallet when blue is clearly the job for the tool? See, I could have saved myself all kinds of grief there. Oh, it stinks. It smells real bad. It smells like hot oil. Woo! It's been a while since we had an engine like that. So first clue is the smell. This thing reeks. It reeks of very hot oil. I don't see any valve train out of place. All this feels like it could have used an adjustment 100,000 miles ago, but nobody ever does that. Outside of that, I don't see anything too wrong. I just smell things that are wrong. Now it's time to peel the timing covers off. That bolt's not necessary. Well, yick. That thing's been chewing on it. That is all cut through here. Look at what the serpentine belts have done. And usually, well, there's two different reasons why these covers do that. Three different reasons. Number one, someone installs them incorrectly and they break them and then they can't sit flush to the engine. Number two is that they get soaked in oil and they become gooey. And number three is that the engines get hot and these covers warp. So you could say that it was due for a timing belt. You could say that. That is a Honda factory belt. It appears that this area is loaded with fiber, probably from the belt, but I don't see any missing teeth. What I find interesting too is that while this has a Honda, I mean it's a Gates, but it's a Honda branded timing belt, it has a blue oil pan gasket. And it has a blue valve cover gasket. Those are not original. These are the Baja Blast flavor of gasket. Next, we're going to take a minute and zip some of these brackets off. Don't need that. So much goo on this one. Next, we're going to do some more housekeeping and remove the coolant manifold and more pipage. Next, we're going to gently remove this water manifold and coolant pipe. I'm not taking that hose off.
Can't make me.
Oh, we got coolant coming out. We're off. And now we're making a giant mess, but it's okay. We have some pig mat here. Cleans it up rather simply. Now it's time to peel the timing belt off. We're going to do that the right way by taking the cam gear off. That's not the right way. But it's not wrong if it worked. That can just hang out there for later. Now I noticed something once the cam gear's off. Oh, that's just RTV. Did I put all this RTV here? Now, the good news about these engines is that the engineers designed the cylinder head in a way where you can remove the head complete with all the valve train and stuff. But that's not really what we do here. We take things apart. So I'm going to take the rocker arm and rocker shafts out of it, and then we'll be able to pull the head. Maybe we'll get the camshaft out first. Time will tell. So let's crack these caps off. And now, I'm going to remove the cam. And there's lots of oil in there. Well, there's quite a lot of oil in the top of this engine. But the cam journals don't look too bad. I don't see signs of bent valves. Normally you could check that by moving your camera or moving your eyes to here. And there'll be one that's significantly higher or lower, or a pair of them. Since there's no valve train to push them down, they should all be closed. I don't see anything too torn up. Camshaft arena doesn't look too bad. Valve train is very simple on these. Camshaft, some wear, but not a ton of damage. I don't think oiling was a common failure for these unless they were starved. They leak and they burn. I'm just going to slide this off so we can get this timing belt out of the way. Rotate this over just a little, probably drain a little oil out of it. Or coolant. It all goes to the same, it does not go all to the same place. Now we can crack the head bolts loose. Oh, I need to get a different socket. Let's just drain this the rest of the way and avoid even more of a mess. It's a lot of oil. Now we can lift the head off, I think. Ah, so much for the head gasket. The head gasket has disappeared. I need to retrieve it. I can't tell you how it looks. We're going to just hang it there and let it drain. Let's take a look at the pistons and the bores. So the pistons are all pretty clean, almost a little cleaner than I'd like to see. There's some junk and debris in there, and then if you look on this side, you'll see that there's some faint vertical wear. There's a little bit of pitting in there as well. There's some more vertical wear. Don't know what 1 and 4 look like, but 2 and 3 look like they have substantial miles, and I don't see anything catastrophic. The cylinder head, on the other hand, well, There's your indicator right there. Combustion gases making it past the head gasket into the cooling system right here. Could even be breached between the two. Blown head gasket, well, at least a breached head gasket. The head gasket itself doesn't look too terrible, but clear signs that it was breached. You know, there's different degrees of how bad you can overheat an engine and how bad a head gasket will blow. And this thing could have run just fine and just pushed a little bit of coolant out. We don't really know the whole story. We do know the engine has a lot of miles, and so far it doesn't look too terrible, all things considered. I looked it over pretty closely, and I don't see any cracks. I don't know if these heads are known for cracking, but I know that these eat head gaskets for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Now it's time to remove my favorite part of the engine, the water pump. And we want to be careful with this. Let's have a peek. Well, that's not okay. So I don't know if you can see that. I can see that. There is a piece of, I don't know if that's RTV or rubber gasket jammed in the impeller. That doesn't go in the cooling system, sir. There it is. Maybe it's part of a serpentine belt. Regardless, first time I found one of those in a water pump. But outside of that, looks like a Honda pump. I don't see a date code anywhere on it. Can't tell if it's original, but it is certainly in excellent shape. If you're new to the channel and you're wondering why I treat some parts so poorly, it's because I laugh every time I get a request for a part like this used. A used water pump. Stop it. Don't do that. Didn't go in, did it? I've heard that before. Now we can rotate this over and start working on the caboose. The 19th first thing we're going to do is remove the oil pan.
No.
Next, we're going to carefully remove the oil pan. Okay, I was kidding at first. What? All right, let's get Blue on the task. I know what you guys are saying. How could you hit that perfectly good sellable steel oil pan with a hammer and ruin it? How could I? Well, you just swing the hammer, that's how. I don't sell these. Now, this was an aluminum pan, like a Y8 pan. There's no way I'd do that. So, taking a look inside the pan, the oil looks pretty good. I don't see any sparkles. No forbidden glitter is kind of a rare sight these days. And the pickup screen is got junk in it. What is that? We'll find out. Next, we'll remove the pickup tube, which has a bunch of junk looking in it. Let's see what's in here. What if we do this? That doesn't help when it's not. I am denting it. I can't tell what that is. All right, let's give it the juice. Oh, some stuff came out there. Ooh, that's cold. It's still not letting go. So it's some kind of foil or something. Certainly not enough to clog this thing, but I did get some other junk out of here like this. That's metal. That's maybe metal. Some of that's rubber. I'm a little concerned. However, yeah, metal's never supposed to be in the pickup. That's bad. But where did it come from? Now we can remove the oil pump. Is that it? Ah, yeah, that's it. Get that drained and then we'll pull this apart. Let's take this oil pump apart. Well, the oil pump housing definitely has some indicators that some debris ran through here. Outer housing, similar. And the gears, they're not terrible. They're not perfect. That one's got some pretty deep grooves in it. And this guy also has some damage. It just looks like a really high mile oil pump. Next, we're going to move this main cap girdle. Gotta be careful. Well, need blue for this one. You can actually pry off the counterweight on the crankshaft. That sounded great. And now we'll crack all of the rod cap bolts or nuts loose. I'm going to rotate this so I can get the next two caps off. Uh-oh, I've created a problem. Now we need to get the rear main seal plate out of the way. Let's get old blue in here. That's perfect. And now I can hopefully lift the crank right out of it. I'm going to rotate this. There's still some residual oil in the pistons. I'll be able to drive the pistons out the top. Wow, they practically fall out. The last thing I'd like to do is remove the oil filter. Someone bucked up and bought an expensive one. Is this not the tool for it? Well, then why did it work? Let's start with the rod bearings. Upper shells are worn through at least one layer of metal in every single cylinder. It's not super concerning. Obviously, it's not ideal. It just reeks of a higher mileage engine. And there's no deep grooves or scratches in there like something is coming apart. Now on to the rods and pistons. The rods are all in excellent condition. No damage there, but let's look at these pistons. One thing I noticed is that top compression ring. Let's find the gap. There you go. There's not a lot of tension left in that top ring. Now, I don't know these that well. I don't know if the top ring and the second ring are the same part. Obviously, the bores taper some at the top. However, when engines get hot, the rings can lose their tension. And it would get hot closest to the head gasket. So it's plausible to think that the lack of gap there in that piston, lack of tension in the top piston ring, is from it overheating, or just miles. It gets squeezed the most. The rest of these look really good. I don't see any actual piston damage. There's a little bit of wear on the skirts. No damage to the top of the pistons. Thank you, compressor. Perfect timing. As I was saying, there's no signs of over rev or signs of piston and valve contact. I would probably feel comfortable reusing these. I don't even know if there's any value to them. But if you'd like to, hey, buy parts for your desk. That's what I say in every video. Everything that I tear down is for sale unless I say otherwise. On to the main bearings. Pretty significant wear. Again, nothing is coming apart. There's no deep grooves. It's just wear. Like, I don't know, it may have 250, 300,000 miles on it. Although I've seen these engines and other engines that have at least that many miles, maybe more, that don't have the bearing wear. The crankshaft doesn't really have any major damage. I think you should get away with a polish, but I don't know if a D17 crank has a ton of value. It might. Not sure. And the bores all look pretty similar. There's no major damage. There is wear, however. Exactly what you would expect for a high mileage engine. A little bit of rust in that one. And lastly, the oil filter. There's some of the oil coming out of it. I didn't really see any metal slivers in here. That probably looks terrible on camera. There's no real cause for concern in this filter. Looks all right. This is a pretty common story for these D17 engines, and that's true whether it's VTEC or non-VTEC. It doesn't really matter. If the engine has the opportunity to run just a little bit warm, the risk is there that you're going to have a problem with the head gasket. And sometimes it's not right away, sometimes it's down the road, or sometimes it is right away. But oftentimes, people don't even realize there's a problem because they run just fine. They just push some coolant into the overflow that looks not so great because it's mixed with combustion gases. And people can drive thousands of miles that way before they realize that it's starting to use coolant or pushing coolant out of the overflow. And then, at that point, they realize there's a problem. Now, in many cases, when they blow head gaskets, it's a pretty simple repair. It's a lot more work to put a head gasket on one of these than it is the predecessor, but the parts are not very expensive. Take your cylinder head to a machine shop, make sure it's flat. Sometimes it doesn't even need to be resurfaced, although I'd never recommend just guessing and hoping for the best. You should absolutely take your head to the machine shop. But this engine could have been saved with a head gasket. It would have been a pretty straightforward repair, but it's likely that the person knew that the engine had some miles on it, plus the collapsed upper compression ring probably didn't run the best. And I agree. I think they should have replaced the engine instead of put a head gasket on it, especially if they knew the mileage of this engine. These engines aren't that expensive, and that also means that the demand for the parts from them simply isn't there. Now, that doesn't mean I can't sell anything, but these are $500 or $600 engines unless they're extremely low miles. And they're 20-something years old, so those are pretty few and far between. So if you'd like to buy any parts out of this engine or anything else I've torn down or out of this hail-damaged 2006 Mustang GT, more like, what the hell happened? I'm going to leave our email in the video description. You can also go to importapart.com and peruse our inventory. I've been uploading our parts cards every single week. If you see something you want on the website that you can add to your cart, you can use the code IDOCARS to save 10% off of anything that you can add to your cart. I really hope you enjoyed this teardown as always. I love all the comments, all the feedback, and even the criticism. I love it all, and I'll catch you on the next one.